Okay, and let's go ahead and get started. Again, my name is John Luby, and I'm one of the application engineers here with FM Systems. Joining me today is Leisha Jackson, and she'll be helping us out a little bit more on some of the questions and things. But if you have any questions, please enter them into the question panel at the right-hand side, and we'll do the best we can to make sure that we get those answered. I did try and send out a poll. I'm not sure how readily available the poll became because it did look like there was a new Java update, and GoToWebinar was dependent upon that, so it might not have gone out. But one of the things that we like to do in most of these webinars is to make sure that everyone has at least a little bit of a foundation into what is it that we're looking at. So on the screen right now, what we're looking at, this is FM Interact version 8.2. It's the currently shipping version of the product, and it's got a lot of features that you may or may not have seen in the past. It's just fresh off the presses, so to speak. It's been out for a couple of weeks, so I did want to at least let you see what this looked like here as well. For those of you who have not seen FM Interact, it's an entirely browser-based system. What that means is that depending upon who you are and how you're logged into the system, you can see and do different things depending upon your permission level. So for example, John Bryant is currently logged in. This user is what we call a move administrator, and we've given him access to quite a bit of information in the system. But some of the things that he might do is perhaps navigate to information in a graphical type of approach where maybe we're going out, finding our information, drilling down through maybe maps or even using other tools like Google Maps, where we might ultimately be able to pull in, zoom to a particular location, select something, and now start seeing data in the system. So depending upon what type of information you've got configured and how you want to see that, you might have this display a little bit differently on your end as well. Obviously, information in the system, very important to be able to get to not only in those graphics, but also maybe to even see it in a report. As with any system you would expect out of the box, we've got the ability to not only find information, but also to see some reports, maybe get some details about exactly what's contained within that report. A lot of the reports you're going to find they're going to have the ability to not only display the tabular data, but also maybe things like pie charts, bar charts, scatter graphs, all sorts of different things like that as well. So I don't want to bore you too much with the foundation of the product, but the FM Interact core application is what all of the other modules get built upon. That core application includes space management and asset management, as well as all of the administrative tools that help us establish how we want the system to look and feel and act. So for today's discussion, we're really talking more about the real estate and portfolio pieces of the application. That's a module that we have that bolts into FM Interact. When we look at that, we might include several different components of lease management or real estate information. Let's start out with areas like lease management. We might incorporate a dashboard. Because the system is so configurable, a user might log in and they might see something like this. This is just their quick dashboard that might allow them to see any of the leases broken out by regions, or perhaps the things that they do on a regular basis right there on their dashboard. you'll notice that one of the areas that we've got in here are those critical dates. What's coming up over the next 12 months? Where do I need to worry about leases that are expiring, or maybe we've got some break or renewal options that are coming up? This can even be a little bit more interactive, where if it's within 60 days, it might show up red, so that we know that we've got a lease that might be expiring in the next 60 days. When we drill into something a little bit more specific, things like the actual leases themselves, we still utilize that same concept of data views. A data view has the ability to have a grid at the top and details down below. As with our entire product offering, you'll find that these details can be as robust as you would like to make them. They might include some fairly basic information, such as what's the lease number, where is this located, and if we want, we can even interact or link those back to those graphics so that we can even get an idea of which floor are we talking about here, or which building. Right now, we're trying to capture several key pieces of information. What's the start date of the lease? What's the end date of the lease? As well as perhaps things like the lease description. We can keep track of lots of pieces of data and tie them back to what you might already be storing in space management. Things like, how big is that? How many square feet are we talking about here? But we can also look outside the building as well. Maybe we need to know how many parking spaces do we have associated with that particular location. When we get into more financial components, we can keep track of not only the notes, but maybe now we're taking that square footage, we're using that monthly rent, and we're actually performing some calculations to get our annual cost per square feet or per square foot. We could look at what exactly do we have as part of that rent schedule. What's the start date and the end date? What were our projected versus actual numbers there as well? Again, depending upon what level of detail you want to get into, you might incorporate things like terms, or maybe even get into more extensive expense categorization. Things like, what exactly is our energy consumption? And in our product, we've got a couple of different ways that you might track that. You might track that simply from a financial obligation. What exactly did we book? How much was it? What was it for? So maybe it's energy consumption. We do also have another module called sustainability, which can help you analyze how you're using that energy. So maybe even trying to find ways for alternative energy sources or discount credits that you might get for changing out light fixtures, things like that. So inside the real estate module, we're really more focused on tracking what is it, how much did it cost, when did we have this expense. Obviously, keeping track of those different options is going to become critical. Knowing exactly what do we have for renewal options, expansion options, break options, knowing what that's going to entail. So do we get 50% off if we do a 5-year renewal? Maybe you've got contacts where you need to keep track of individuals or even groups that you contact in case of issues. So that could be a leasing company, it could be maybe a maintenance staff that you work with. Again, how do we get a hold of them? What's the phone number, email address, whatever it may be. These can get as detailed as you want or be fairly simplistic. Maybe you've just got email notifications that are set up with those particular organizations. Critical dates, really anything outside of what we're already tracking. Maybe we've got more things that we want to keep track of, more specific dates associated with that particular lease. And there's a document management component to this as well, where if you need to keep track of things like lease agreements, rent letters, those can be attached to the system so that we can simply view that at any point in time given access to that site. So we can always get to those particular documents that we might be working with as well. All of this is permissionable, so meaning that you don't have to have everybody in your organization be given full permissions to pull up any document. So you'll notice that depending upon who you are in the system, it can control what do you have access to, what things can I see, what things can I actually modify. And of course, even things like amendments to leases, keeping track of those dates, who made this change, when was it made, what's it involved. As with everything in the system, we really start talking more about what can we get out of this application. Lots of data can be tracked, and if you saw things in the system that perhaps were missing from what you need to track, those are all configurations. You can add brand new fields of data, even new tables. So for example, we had one group that was telling us that they were using our fleet management module. We had to tell them, we don't have a fleet management module. The reality was that they had configured that in the application themselves. No programming, it was a configuration. And I can even show you some of those tools if we need to later on. When we're looking at this data, though, we might want to try and analyze it in a whole host of ways. Maybe we've got a large portfolio, and we're trying to keep track of information in that portfolio. We might want to see what do we have based upon our building sizes. Let me see a swim lane diagram so that I can get a better understanding of what our portfolio looks like, which buildings are the largest, things like that. Embedded within that, though, you'll notice that we can even have a link to another version of the report that is now more focused on cost. So now we might want to be looking at the specifics associated with the cost. We could look at, for example, Midtown Tower and say $7.6 million. Why is that so expensive? We can drill down into the specifics of that particular building, and now we're looking at what makes up those costs. What do we have for planned maintenance or utility costs, housekeeping, taxes, insurance, whatever you need to have as part of that makeup. We can also start looking at things in a planned versus historical approach. So maybe over the course of time, we know that we planned this green line. We thought that these were going to be our planned costs. But as we're tracking that information, we might notice that in reality, we're not as high on those costs as we thought. We can even drill down into some of the specifics. Let me just hide this menu to make it a little bit easier to see here. But we can drill down into some of the specifics so that now year over year, we're even able to look at what were those planned costs versus actual costs. Highlight in red all of the particular leases where our planned cost was exceeded by our actual costs. So a tremendous amount of information that can be tracked in the system and be shown at any given point in time. So at this point, I'll go ahead and take a break. If there are any questions, anything that folks were interested in seeing that they didn't see, Please go ahead and enter those questions into the panel on the right-hand side. Okay, well, if you end up with any other questions or something that you'd like to see, I noticed that Leisha had sent out a chat message to everybody. Please go ahead and contact Leisha, and we'll do our best to get you a more detailed example of some things, or perhaps do a different demonstration for you as well.
Hi, John. It looks like a question came through. It looks like in regards to tracking planned versus actual costs, are the actuals entered manually or accessed from within FM Interact?
Yeah, so good question. When we talk about planned versus actual, some of that data might actually be coming from other systems. We're so openly architected that information can be pulled from any data source that is ODBC compliant, Open Database Connectivity compliant. And that's really anything from an Excel spreadsheet to an Oracle financial system. So in some cases, for smaller organizations, they might just physically type in costs. Other organizations might integrate with another system to pull in that data maybe every night at midnight, for example. So hopefully that gives an answer for that question.
All right. Do you ever foresee a time that FM Interact can be used to automatically pay rents through a financial database like SAP?
Yeah, so good question. You know, we're not an accounting package. We do have almost all of our implementations. We're integrating with solutions like SAP or PeopleSoft because those are very powerful solutions with financial components to them. So we can certainly feed data to those systems because, again, we're openly architected, but we're not looking to try and replace those types of systems. So as far as automatically paying rents through that financial system, that would probably be an integration of firing a trigger maybe, you know, the first day of the month to send a notification to SAP to go ahead and perform an action. Could it be done? Absolutely. Is it something that we're going to try and replace? Probably not. But real good questions. Anything else that comes up, by all means, go ahead and enter them there. And I'll stay on the line here for a few more minutes just to make sure that we get any of those questions answered. But if, let's see, could you briefly show the configuration? Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I intended to show that. Good point. So when we talk about configurability in the system, we've got an entire tool set. So you don't need to be a programmer to do this type of work. What this allows us to do is really get all the way down even into the tables. So for example, when we're talking about buildings or leases or whatever it may be, you'll notice that on the left-hand side, these are all the table names. And then on the right-hand side, it's telling us a little bit about kind of a more common piece of information. So when we look at things like leases, you'll notice that there are an awful lot of fields of data already in the system. These are all sorts of things that we can track. But you've also got the ability to add a brand new field. So let's see, I'm trying to think of something that would be a good example of something that we might not have already in the system. How about, I don't know, we'll do something like elevation. So I'm going to create a brand new field because maybe we've decided we're going to work in a lot of different places, and we want to keep track of things in how high above sea level is this location, just something a little bit off topic, so to speak. So I'm going to go ahead and just create this particular field. Through that process, what you'll see is that I just added something to the database. There are no fields that are populated with data yet, but I added it to the database. What that actually allows me to do is now if I'm working in that real estate component, I can modify one of our views, and you saw we had a lease agreements view. We have tabs or a grid that shows up at the top, but we might also have those details that show down below. As part of that, we can actually come in here and even add a field from that particular list, including ones that we just created. So what that does for me is now, based upon that type of data, I've added a brand new field to the database, and I've now decided to make that available in my lease agreements view. So very quickly made those changes. I don't need to push that out to anybody else. It's instantly going to be available the next time that individual comes in and perhaps is working with their lease agreements, and maybe they're looking at some of the details that they've got access to. There's our field for elevation. So I could say, well, this is at 1,200 feet, and save those changes. So the configurability of the system, very, very powerful. Hopefully that gives you some idea of just how easily that can be done.
All right, can objects such as views and tables be copied, and the changes made to the copy in order to maintain the integrity of the original object, or can they only be made to the original object?
Yeah, I think what you're asking there is, can I make a duplicate of something? So I've gone through and created a data view, for example, of things that I want. Now I'd like to have another version of it that might include one or two additional fields or maybe less data. Absolutely. So what you'll see is that there are options to duplicate fields of data. So yes, there are options there as well.
Would you mind running an ad hoc report that shows the elevation field?
Yeah, so, and the only difference there when we talk about ad hoc reporting is that it's going to be dependent upon what I've been given access to. So in my case, I don't think that I'm going to be given access to any of those fields because we have to decide what types of data have I been given access to run an ad hoc report upon. So you'll notice, first off, you don't see anything in here for real estate. My permissions aren't allowing me to get into that information. But if we allowed that data to be set up, you can have your administrators, and this is, you know, the folks that are managing the system, they're going to get to decide what fields or what groupings of data do you want to be able to get access to, as well as those fields. So if you had access to them, they'd appear just down here like you're seeing me drag and drop these fields into that particular report. But yes, I'd have to be given access to that new field as part of that schema for ad hoc reporting. And if anybody hasn't seen this type of thing, our ad hoc reports, depending upon, again, what data you've been given access to see, you can build a report on the fly. Good questions.
All right, are there any additional questions? All right, if there are no more questions, I would like to thank everyone for attending this presentation today. Like John had mentioned, I put my contact information. I send that over to the entire audience through the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. Please feel free to contact me with any questions. We will stay on the line for a couple more minutes. And if anyone has questions, like I said, please feel free to contact me, and I hope everyone has a great day.